Hey, what's going on? Today is Monday, February 26th, and you are listening and watching the Daily AI Show live. And today we are back this week. We've got all sorts of fun topics, but one of the ones we have for today is talking all about HCI. And if you don't know what that is, that's human computer interface. We want to talk all about the Neuralinks of the world, which probably gets a lot more of the press, but there's other companies out there. How is AI integrating with these HCIs and brain computer interfaces as well, which is probably more on the Neuralink side. So lots to dive in and talk about. But I think the person to go to kick this off would be you, Andy. By the way, Jyunmi, Beth, Karl, Andy, and I'm Brian. We're all here today. So I always like to let you know who's here. But Andy, why don't you kick us off on all the amazing things that are going on in the HCI and AI world?
First, I'll just lay out a kind of a progression that's been observable over the course of my life in how we interact with machines, and particularly electronic machines and calculating machines and so on. Just a quick anecdote about me personally. In my high school, we had a data processing thing. And what it was a big old machine that had punch cards in it, literally. And that was, you got to sit at one keyboard that then punched into the cards, and then those cards had to be stacked into the computer so it could read them, right? That's the beginning of kind of human experience of human computer interface. And then in the 80s, it became important to have a graphical user interface. Doug Engelbart was a name that was associated with the development of the vision for how computer interfaces would progress. And so the graphical user interface with a screen where you actually have graphic elements and you can have a keyboard and a screen. And then along came the mouse, right? The mouse was a very much easier thing to do than to use a keyboard. You could select things that were graphic representations on the screen. Now, fast forward to natural language processing so that the computer actually has the ability to hear what you want to say. It's actually happening to translate it into text and then inputting it as text. But that's the advancement, so that the computer can hear what you have to say. About the same time as that's happening, there's VR, which allows you to interact immersively with an environment that's computing and presenting the output of that environment to your eyes, with motion tracking for both your head, to track your gaze and manipulate the computer output to your eyes so that it looks like you're in a real 3D space, a much more natural kind of interface than sitting at a screen with a keyboard and a mouse. So all of that moves forward to the point where now we're starting to see computer devices that encompass vision. So we're going to talk today, I'm sure, about a couple of things that have cameras built into them, several things. Now, you've heard about the Meta glasses. You heard about AI Pin, which has a camera, on a pin-mounted thing like Star Trek, right? It's a more natural kind of way to interact with something than to pick up your phone, put in your, passcode, find the app that you want to use, click the little microphone button, and then speak to it. I mean, you literally just touch the pin and start speaking, and it's ready and waiting for that. Similarly, AI Rabbit, the Rabbit R1 is another device. I'm looking forward to getting mine. And if we have time, I have teed up a couple of short TikToks that will give you, if you're seeing these things for the first time, a quick demo of each of those. And so that's really what we're talking about, is what's the most natural and usable way to interact with computers and, more importantly now, AI. Is there a need for an AI device? Not a need maybe, or is there a preference for an AI device that's more usable than your smartphone as a way of interfacing with AI? That's sort of the intro to that subject.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that you did not highlight in that is you referenced spatial computing, but one of the things that I find really exciting is, though I do not possess it because that's not happening, is the Vision Pro That's not happening with version 1. I am with Karl's school of, like, let the bugs happen and, come in a little come in a little later. Um, don't get the first version. But the idea that it could be tracking my eyes, so I don't even really need to do something like move something specific. I'm literally just looking at something and it is intuiting, right? It's not intuiting, it's programmed so that it can make inferences based on the way that my eyes are moving. I find that really exciting.
And I think there's like that idea, what we saw with the Apple Vision Pro, and God knows there's so many YouTube videos and people using Marcus Brownlee always does a phenomenal job with his breakdowns and stuff like that. There's so many others out there, but the idea that you look and I guess pinch, I don't own it either, obviously, but you just sort of pinch your fingers and you go, okay, that with this camera, my Lumina camera that I'm recording this on, it's probably already possible from a desktop scenario as well, where I don't have to wear the interface. So for instance, right now I'm looking in the upper right corner and I'm seeing Beth, but maybe if I'm focusing on Beth talking, Beth's little square in my StreamYard, which is what we're using, gets a little bit bigger for me. And then while I'm talking to Beth or whatever, and then I'm like, Beth stops talking and Jyunmi starts talking. Of course, my eyes go over to watch Jyunmi's mouth move and Jyunmi talk. And now Beth gets a little bit smaller on my screen and Jyunmi comes up. And so this idea that we could have this very, very quickly within a Zoom setting, StreamYard setting, and then the same thing with pinching. If the camera is watching me, then it's very, it's not a big leap to say, oh, could I go over and turn back on the music that I do at the beginning of the show and the graphics and stuff by simply looking over to the bottom right of my screen and just clicking my fingers or whatever that feature is. That's an Apple thing, obviously, with the clicking of the fingers. All of that for everything we're doing on Streamer right now, probably none of it would really use the mouse, except for when you get back to like needing the keyboard and having to type things in. And I don't know if that becomes like I don't know, Jimmy, is that like a go on mute? And I'm like, I say the thing I want to say really quick, and that's the typing, and then it brings it back. I'm not really sure.
Right.
But anyway, my point to that, Beth, was just to
Subtle.
say really quick, like we're all thinking about, oh, you got to wear the goggles and stuff, and I'm thinking like, no, we already have a lot of this stuff, and Andy, you kind of said it too, that sort of already exists. It's more or less surprising to me that it hasn't hit the mass market, and we haven't started to find more ways to get our hands off the mouse while we're interacting at a desktop. I certainly do 95% of my work at the desktop. I still sit at the desk. I don't get to move around the house a little bit more. So until we can get to those places where, whether it's the Rabbit or the R1 or Humane or whatever the case is, and I'm able to leave my desk, kind of like we talk about with ChatGPT, and I can have conversations and do brainstorming, walking laps around the island in my kitchen, until I can really detether from this seat, from this desk. I think the first step really for some of these newer interventions is just, well, how can we get the mouse out of the scenario a little bit more? I don't know. That's where I see this this next step going, I guess.
There was a couple, 3 years ago, there was a huge push in AR where a lot of things you can do with your phone, you can measure and all that kind of stuff. And then I saw this keyboard where, it still mounts on your desk, and then I think it's done by lasers or something, and then you don't have to have a physical keyboard. But exactly what you're thinking of, Brian, I'm like, well, I just rather have a keyboard than a non-physical keyboard because there's no difference. And the laser one isn't as responsive as the the mechanical keyboard. And I got to thinking about that, and I don't know if I'm going down a different rabbit hole here, is when I'm starting to see electric vehicles, and there's a lot of touch screens and so on. A lot of the times when you're driving, you want to actually feel your way through, hey, I need to increase the heat, decrease the heat. Like there's like the mechanical touch versus a touch screen where you have to pay attention unless you've mastered the muscle memory, or like the exact, like I can press this twice, press this once, press this to reach the whatever, and then I can increase the fan or whatever you're trying to increase, right? Versus like, oh, I can just twist the knob and I know that it's there, and to me that's a little safer and probably easier. But when we get to like these human interfaces with AI, like the Quest or the Vision Pro, probably one of those first things that I'm looking for. Hopefully version 2 or version 3 can fix that keyboard and maybe make that the pinch a little bit snappier, so it's more intuitive rather than, because from what I've read, you can only do one taps, not multiple fingers. So you're
Yeah.
just doing this, which
Yeah.
if you think about it, it's pretty cool. You can do it in air, but it's like, well, it's not that great. And then I'm doing this, right? And then I'm looking. So how can you make that more intuitive? I think they'll
Right.
fix it.
And Karl, some of that might be, I'll say it might be age too. Like my daughter at 13 clearly has no issue with texting, and despite texting being around now for well over a decade, I suffer miserably from it. I'm pretty sure my hands are too big. I got fat fingers, and that's why I can't text. And I never hit the space bar. I only hit the point. I only hit the period on my phone, and it's a miserable existence. I just want to learn. I just want to type, and I want to hear. I want to hear the keyboard when I type or whatever. But to that point, this is not a big deal. And so, a QWERTY keyboard is what was brought up years and years and years ago. But for these new interfaces, I think that's an interesting idea of like, is it even the keyboard? Is it a bit of this and a bit of this and a bit of looking? And is it some weird hybrid version that altogether removes the keyboard? But it's not like there's a version. I think maybe the problem is they're trying to create a digital version or laser version of the keyboard. And maybe the real answer is, guess what? You don't need the keyboard because through a series of visual, tactile, and all that, we can get rid of it. Sorry,
Isn't the obvious replacement of the keyboard voice?
Yes. And
except that I don't want to say everything out loud.
Well, but imagine you're in a situation where physically you are able to walk around and wave your arms at your windows and doing that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that isn't also a situation where I can say anything I want to say to the computer out loud, right? Like I'm not, that's not a library. Like we're not doing that in the library.
It doesn't really. I mean, look, there's a lot of COVID brought obviously a huge additional push to work from home, and there's a lot of people who are now more siloed than they were before, and not in large offices. But obviously, that's still a huge part of work. And so I do look at that and I go, okay, maybe. And Andy, I think like what I see there is, okay, let's get into this a little bit because this is another huge area, and I mentioned at the top of the thing, Andy, what you're talking about as far as visual and being able to look at things and that progression is HCI. But then you have HCI, which is more on the BCI side, which is the brain connection interface. So there's the actual surgical incisions of things like Neuralink, which I didn't realize until I researched it, that the fibers are so fine that it has to be surgically implanted by a robot who has the, dexterity to put all the fibers where it needs to be. You can't even do it by human hand because they're too fine of fibers or whatever, which I found really interesting. But okay, that's an implant. All right, are we all going to get an implant in order to work more efficiently? No, but like Snap bought NextMind, and that is a wearable. And now that that wearable does not send stuff back to the brain. It's only taking, as far as I understand it, the ECGs, which is the brain waves, and it's interpreting those. Okay, now we have something, right? Because now I already know that there's directional sound. I already know that exists. I've seen speakers. I think they're too expensive to be at the natural thing. But if I sit at my desk and I do this, I'm the only one that can hear the sound. It's always coming directly to my ears. And the idea being if people are next to me in cubicles, they would not be able to hear the sound, despite the fact that I don't have headphones on and speakers. And we know we can do bone conduction for talking. So are we getting close maybe with something like a NextMind where you do sit at your desk and you put on, but it's not covering your eyes. And now I am able to speak without having to type or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I was theorizing, but it seems like that's sort of where this is going, staying short of obviously the surgical, which I think I definitely want to talk about in today's show because just amazing improvements in that area as well. But
so let me mention, please, that these things will first, I think, be proven out, these, advancements in human computer interface to the benefit of accessibility for people with disabilities.
Right.
So like Neuralink, for example, its first use case is somebody who doesn't have the ability to manipulate a mouse or a keyboard or anything else can now move a cursor with their thoughts on a screen. There's something very similar to that in AI Pin, where you don't have to move. All you have to do is move your hand like this, and you're moving the cursor, right? So gestures are being interpreted by the camera in AI Pin to control a visual display that's projected onto your hand. The camera is good enough that it tracks your hand's position as you're moving it around, and then you have subtle movements of your hand that can move the cursor of the display on your hand. It's very cool. So yeah, all of these things are happening now, but I think they'll find their first uses making it easier to interface with computers for people who don't have the typical skills and or equipment that we have become accustomed to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we need to also cover the purpose. Like you, Andy, you've touched upon it. This will be the inroads to help those folks. But what is HCI or BCI and things like that? What is their main purpose? And as we've seen through progression of time, when we've gone from traditional desktop computing to mobile computing, and now we're inroads into mainstream spatial computing and things like that, is we're looking for that fine balance to have less resources or less attention that needs to be spent in the interaction, right, from the human side. The computer is offloading or lifting most of that, and that gives us more freedom to interact with the world around us, right, whether that be an immersion kind of thing with like the Vision Pro, for that kind of experience where we're using minimal effort to interact with whatever information, or even like watching a movie, how they are doing it now, things like that. So it's finding that balance between this is what a technology can do. Like Karl said, that laser keyboard thing, that's been around for years, like decades, right? It never really worked too well, not enough to, replace a regular keyboard. But those inroads and those kinds of technologies, knowing, where your hands are or your body position and things like that, that's been used in motion capture for years. And just evolving that, those technologies would help alleviate the lift from the human side. So you can have wearables, you can interact with the world with like AR and things like that, and it's all of these layers to help us go from sitting at a computer to where we will be more comfortable as human beings interacting with the world around us, or interacting with the work that we have to do. And I think that's where that fine balance is, and where this technology goes.
Nice.
Do
I'm
you
with
see that
Brian
as like,
too about like it would be happy for me if the human computer interface that had some sort of keyboard could realize that I too hit the period instead of the spacebar, and automatically adjust the spacebar over like 1 millimeter, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
that
want
would
you
be
to ask
amazing.
me where I want it because I don't know. You do,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Or my
Clearly
AI
I've hit it
agent
the wrong
knows that I
time
try
many
to hit
times.
period instead of space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Just
you all
just move it over. You knew I was trying to hit the space bar.
Exactly.
That language model, that data collection should be solid at this point as far as going. You have thousands of points of data knowing I screwed it up every single time. No, I agree with you. I think, Jyunmi, when you were talking, I was thinking like, aren't we really saying productivity? That's the word that kind of keeps coming back to me. And what I mean by that is we can take productivity to, we think about it in business terms, which is fine. But also productivity to me could be, I know just my understanding just from knowing people that were friends of my mom's and stuff like that, where there was it was a stroke or something like that. And it was the husband of one of my mom's friends. This is going back to the 80s. And he could do the fairly laborious task of looking at a letter, and then it would write that letter and then the next letter. And so he this gentleman could communicate back with his wife and family, but it took forever, right? Because it was like letter by letter by letter by letter, but it worked. And I mean, outside of that, huge advancements, and obviously I'm sure that's sped up over the decades as well, but that could be looked at as productivity. We could look at productivity as if it's a like this company Paradromics, Dromics, it might be Paradromics, Paradromics. They are specifically looking at brain computer interfaces for severely motor impaired people communicating, enabling social connection. So severely motor impaired people. So with walking, moving hands, artificial limbs, things like this. So that could be looked at productivity, or simply the business model, what we're all talking about, which could be looked at productivity as well, which is if there's better ways for me to interact with the work I'm already doing, and that brings efficiencies to my work day. Well, that's very much like an LLM coming in and us saying like, oh, I have this AI agent that can now take off my plate some of these individual tasks. To me, it's like all part of the same soup, I guess, is the way I think of it. But there's definitely different ways that HCI is integrating with AI. And I think as we see these language models, that's kind of, I don't know, Andy or Karl, maybe like, what do you guys think? Like, I kind of see these language models as like sort of the missing piece that's going to make some of these maybe previously already sort of baked out HCIs that maybe didn't land. Maybe that's the key that's going to unlock that to bring that to the masses.
I would say that conversational AI, which is what LLMs accomplish, allows you to tune the instruction to the AI, to overcome mistakes and or misunderstandings. So that's the back and forth of a conversation that we do as humans to refine our mutual understanding in order to get to a goal. And so, I think many of the things that were hampered by the inability of the compute side of the thing to actually be in a dynamic conversation that arrives at ultimately an assistant with agency that can act on your behalf. That's the holy grail, is that now you can have multiple modes of communication, whether it's visual, like using a camera, or it's you suppose I have no voice box and I can't really articulate with a voice, but that computer's going to be able to read my lips. We can train that thing to read my lips. So as long as the camera's there, I can speak again, even though I may have lost my ability to communicate. That's a kind of a hacked example of that. But the computers and the advancements of AI are going to make it possible for that side of the equation to be incredibly facile at interpreting and then resolving what it is that the human really wants to do, even if they're massively disabled, all the way up to including a brain-computer interface.
Well, haven't we seen, I think that video of like 6 months ago, 8 months ago now, of the person with Parkinson's, and then it was like you turn on something, the chip in their brain they installed something, and then the moment it was activated, the amount of shaking and movement like significantly dropped to
like they can drink a glass of water, which they couldn't do before.
They couldn't.
Literally moments before, they couldn't bring a glass of water to their lips. Yeah, and that's like noise cancellation inside the human brain.
Yeah.
And it's an active electronic process that's been implanted that basically adjusts for the misfiring of neurons in there and tempers them, damps them to the point where now command and control from the human's effort, like guiding their muscles, is effective because it's not being overridden by all of this, massive noise that's been injected.
One thing I wanted to ask all of you would be, how some things, and it's hard to see where this is some tech, some things are just maybe either 2, 3, 4, 5 years just ahead of its time. So maybe some things that we've seen in the past was just too early because a dependency on another technology wasn't quite ready. So but it needed that other piece of technology to make it go forward. So maybe things like agents or GPT-5 are the missing piece for some of those previous tech that just didn't pan out because they couldn't compute well. So maybe, but since we're talking about AI, it isn't years, it's months. So maybe they were released like 8 months earlier than if they were released 8 months later, they would have gained the traction because of how quick we're seeing it. So, and when we talk about humane, maybe it's a little ahead of its time because there isn't there isn't a transition to it. It's just a direct, oh my gosh, I'm gonna now have this thing and it's gonna be with me. Maybe there's like one extra step that needed to happen before everyone's comfortable with that. And maybe the Vision Pro was that step and then to the next step. I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree.
Intuitive usability is a function of simple, intuitive interactions, and then familiarity with those models of interaction with the computer. Now, I'm going to dive down into like the usability of the phone as compared to Humane's AI pin for the general user. So I kind of alluded to it before, but let me start with the idea of gestures. So we have touchpads on computers now that we didn't have before. They are in effect a replacement for mice and all the multiple buttons on a mouse that can do different actions in effect. But now you can use multiple gestures, if you will, by the touchpad with one finger swiping down does one thing, two does something else, three going right to left does something else. But that's not that intuitive. You really have to practice and use that. And I would say that the vast majority of users of touchpads don't really understand the full capabilities of the gesture control of the touchpad.
Right. Now, but the motivation to do that is, like, I would say the vast majority of people who have carpal tunnel totally get the multiple gestures, right? There's an inherent motivation to, like, okay, this hurts. I will figure out how to do it in a way that's not painful.
Right.
And you're right that that's not something that the average person.
Well, I think we also have to understand that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I just want to say, like, now on the AI pin, you see in the demonstrations, I don't have one, and I'd love to have one, but you see in the
Humane, reach out to us.
Okay. Press once to talk to the AI, right? Press twice to translate, like our two fingers, I should say, not press twice, not two taps, but two fingers on the button held, speak something in, and then it's going to know that you want whatever you said to be translated to the different language. So translate this next sentence, please, into Swahili. Okay, and then you say your sentence, and it comes out in Swahili by pressing with two fingers. One finger. Now that's simple, right? There's not a whole lot of instructions that you need to understand there. And I think that bodes well for AI pin and its other Star Trek communicator type, followers. I mean, there will be multiple who provide that and at lower and lower cost because it's easy to understand and easy to use. And it's more direct and immediate. I believe that there will be a need for something less complex than all the apps and all of the safety controls on my smartphone to make immediate access to Perplexity available. And by the way, the Rabbit R1, which it looks like a teenager's device because it was designed by Teenage Design, which is so it has a very simple and easy look to it. It comes with a full year of Perplexity Plus. So there's a partnership between Rabbit AI and Perplexity. So the very best search tool that is AI powered out there, Perplexity, is built into Rabbit. And it also has a camera. It has a simple button, one button press to talk to that device. So it's basically knocking away all of the obstacles that some people have. There's a cognitive load associated every time I open up my device, try to remember where the bucket of all the apps is that has the one app that I'm looking for. I want to be able to get to that much more quickly. And so I'll be experimenting with Rabbit. I have one coming. It's coming hopefully at the end of March or early April.
early April, I think.
Well, I
June.
think let's just take a minute or two here as we sort of wrap up today's discussion to talk about maybe what the future looks like. Now, Andy, you sort of touched on that a little bit. Jimmy, you did as well. And I was reading it was a Forbes article when I was doing some stuff here from Bernard Marr is who it's from last August. And it's like, where next? It says like, obviously this is a very advanced technology. But we're not too far off. Maybe the complete fantastical, such as being able to digitally record all of a person's life experiences. That might be in the near future if there's an ability to do that and grab the brain waves, so to speak. We can, in near future, we can expect less invasive methods of capturing electrical brain activity, meaning that technology will have a wider number of applications without users having to undergo implant surgery. It's likely to include advancements in the near infrared spectroscopy, which detects changes in blood flow in the brain using light. It's pretty cool sounding. And then it goes on to say, like, look, how far away are we really from brain to brain interfaces, essentially making telepathic messages? Because if there's an implant that can decode my brain signals, and Jyunmi has one too, and the only thing in between that is some sort of technology or software or otherwise, or AI that's able to take that, then Jyunmi and I could be living in the Matrix. Maybe we are. So I think there's some like really cool, like far advanced stuff, but I kind of agree with you guys. Like the next step here is, from the interface standpoint, things like Humane, although I will tell you, I think my opinion on that is that they will falter and fail, or maybe not rabbit as much. And I think it's because of speed. Once we get to the point where we can put, small enough chips and processors like we're seeing coming out, and we have full non-Wi-Fi necessary LLMs and all that, and perplexities and all that on device, everything I've seen from those, I just feel like it's too slow. And if I'm going to hold my hand out and say, what's the weather? And I have to wait 10 seconds or 15 seconds to get that answer, it doesn't necessarily make it something that I think is going to be super valuable to people. It'll be a novelty. It'll be fun to do. And people will be like, oh, wow, look at this. You can swipe on my hand and stuff. But really, truly, to get mass adoption, I just think it's going to have to be as fast as your phone. I mean, because that's what people are going to expect on it. So anyway, that's where I see sort of like the near future stuff. Do you guys have any, like, whether it be predictions or like, what does the next 3-5 years of this look like? Is it just more versions of Apple Vision Pro and things like that? Or is it more wearables? Or more like what you're saying, Andy, where it's like, it's a wearable, but it's not necessarily covering your eyes necessarily. It's not immersive in that way. It's more AR versus VR.
I think what I'd like to point out is, so let's take the current batch of things that come out: Apple Vision Pro, Meta glasses, Rabbit, and Humane Pin. Okay, these are all examples of first forays into getting mass adoption. Right? The concept of using cameras and gestures, or using a headset to read what you're looking at, or have, pointing out in space and things like that. Those concepts have been around for decades. We've just reached a point where we have a commercially viable product that we can now help train the consumer base to accept and to adopt.
Right.
And that's I think the main purpose of these products hitting the market is, oh, we're introducing something that can be a benefit to you. We see in 5 years or 10 years time that we aren't going to be on the keyboard and mouse anymore. We're going to be moving in this direction, where you're doing gestures, or it's following your eye movements, or we talk about things like haptic feedback and things like that. If you're familiar with Ready Player One and the gloves and all those kinds of things, right? That's been around for a very long time, but now we're at a point where the technology can be produced quick enough and cheap enough to get it out there. Are we going to see immediate adoption? No. it's going to take a couple of years until we start to see everyone with a Rabbit or a similar device, or someone with a pin or similar device, or maybe even a lighter, cheaper version of the Vision Pro. So I think spatial computing, HCI, even BCI, what we're going to see over like the next few years is just more in a position to be more adopted as the new interface or as the new interaction, and moving from the existing systems.
And I'm going to say that the things that will succeed, like Jyunmi is alluding to, are either things that have an amazing story to them, right? So Rabbit was so successful in their thing because they spun a really nice story. Or I think the easier path for the adoption, I'm not saying it's the easier path for the creation and the tech behind it, is to go with something that we already know in the popular culture. Right. So one of the frustrations for me about what I refer to as Lady Wiretap, so that she will not start speaking when I say her name in my room, is that she is not as responsible as Star Trek computer, blah, 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 blah. Right. If you can get a story, if you can tap into a story that we already understand, now you don't have to educate us about how to use it in a like really new idea. It's like, oh, it's like the tricorder, but you do it this way. Right.
Yeah. Well said.
Humane pin is actually a Starfleet communicator. Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for.
Listen, somebody will get those naming rights and do that, because I mean, why wouldn't they? Somebody who owns the Star Trek, name, image, and likeness or whatever is going to make a lot of money. So in the future, I don't know who owns it. CBS, whoever owns it, but somebody's going to make a lot of money on it. Any other last thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I want to just say we're going to wrestle over the course of the next couple of years with the emergence of continuously listening and watching AIs being supported around by other people. And how society responds to that is like an open question. I'm not personally afraid of that, but there are some ethical and sort of surveillance related issues with there being continuous monitoring that's available either to individuals or to other institutions.
Yeah.
The one last thing I want to point out too is like, I know, I believe like the foundations are going to be coming in the next, quote unquote, the software is going to come out in the next 3 to 6 months with the advances we make with large language models and so on. And then I think that's when we'll have enough to get the actual hardware. And, a lot of these AI companies are talking about hardware, and I'm sure we have a show coming up about AI hardware, but like, I think you need to get the base first before you connect it to that next level. So yeah, I'm excited about not just the next couple of years, but like the next 3 to 6 months, which I think is like going to be pretty big.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, listen, that'll wrap it up for today. Coming up later on in this week, tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the future of podcasts and news as, we get into this new AI era and what does that mean? And we'll get into that tomorrow, what sparked that, but it has to do with perplexity, believe it or not. Wednesday, we'll be talking about the news. Thursday, navigating paths between AI innovation and bias. And that will be talking about what happened with Google and why they had to pull away creating images of people and what happened there. Friday, we have a review of the Arc Search app. I will be out for that show, which I'm totally bummed about because I love that damn app. So maybe I'll do a pre-recording for that one. But that's what we got coming up the rest of the week, guys. Until then, we'll see you back tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out with us. Bye.
Aloha.